What's wrong with you today, Meka? You're not yourself.
Oh, don't mind me. I don't exist.
What? What do you mean?
I'm just so sick of overhearing these conversations about whether trans people are real or not, if we are due human rights.
That's weird.
It's every day you overhear. People don't notice that I'm trans, so I overhear these conversations all the time. They're too polite to say it to your face, but they'd say it behind your back, and it just contributes to this discourse that's like all about whether we should have the same rights as everyone else.
My gosh. We make references to your experience as a trans person a lot when we talk about personal development. So I think today would be a great opportunity to dive deeper into your personal experience as a trans person. What do you think?
Yeah, that's actually a good idea. Let's add some of our voices to this conversation.
Yeah, let's do that. Welcome to Thriving Between the Lines, the podcast that examines personal development books through the lens of intersectionality, making self-help content more accessible and relatable. I'm life coach and woke snowflake, Leslie Crudup Villa Garcia.
And I'm Meka, a real boy. But my wood's still gross.
And together, we're not just reading between the lines,
We're thriving between the lines.
All right, and again, we are coming to you from Mianjin, or Brisbane, in Australia, land of the Yagara and Turrbal people, where it always was and always will be Aboriginal land.
Just a quick content warning for this episode. There will be mention of self-harm and suicidal ideation and traumatic times in life. So keep that in mind, and maybe you want to skip to another episode.
So, Meka, tell us more about your wood.
Just a penis joke, like usual.
There's my buddy. There's the Meka I know and love. You very much do exist.
Yes, I do. And I guess I've just been getting a bit extra annoyed because the Olympics have been on recently.
Yep.
And it's just brought up the conversation of whether trans women deserve to be in sports that's aligned with their gender.
Yep.
And I know that doesn't affect me directly, but the injustice of it's something we should all care about. As soon as you can exclude someone from society for an intrinsic part of who they are, everyone's at risk.
Yep.
They're coming for everyone.
Yeah. And the whole concept of trans exclusion, the way it relates to the work that we do on this podcast is when we read these books, especially ones that get too deep into the masculine, the feminine, sexual polarity, there are these two things that exist. And even when it's written about more casually in a social sense, it's like, this is how women think, this is how men think, blah, blah, blah. We've talked about the way of the superior man. But even books like the 5 love languages are framed in a very, cis-normative context.
Yep.
And it's like, okay. It's not that every book has to be very specifically representative of every marginalized group, but we need to recognize some of the dangers of that, not leaving any room for the existence of other people's experiences.
Growing up, those things were the ones that set me off the most. Girls this, boys that. I'm like, no, we're the same. Because, I mean, I think there are some differences in, like, the brain structure and that, but there's people in between as well.
Yeah.
And I'm technically non-binary, but I'm comfortable enough just fitting into the male box.
Okay.
So like I'm non-binary right down that end.
Okay. And which pronouns do you use?
I use he, him. So
Okay.
basically in society I'm pretty happy just being seen as male, fitting into the male stereotype box kind of culture, but
stereotypical male. And I know this might sound horrible when I first say it, but my first thought isn't Meka is such a stereotypical male just because of the conversations we've had around masculinity.
I'm the sort of guy I would like all guys to feel safe and happy being. And the more I know lots of men who don't feel the need to play that part, the toxic masculinity, and they just play. When I say masculinity, I think of things closer to like being comfortable in your manhood and being a present husband and father, or now I'm trying to put masculinity into a box and it's real hard.
Well, in one of our previous footnotes, we talked about some examples of positive non-toxic masculinity.
That's what I mean. Like, there's lots of ways to be a man, and there's no mistaking that that person is a man, but they don't have to play this, like, fragile, toxic masculinity game.
Yeah.
They're kind of like, I'll hold my wife's handbag. I'll wear a dress if you want. Like, I don't care. This doesn't affect who I am as a person. And I think that's quite important to society. The more people that are comfortable in who they are, the more time we have to actually concentrate on the stuff that's important.
Yes.
And so I know when people are that fragile and that worried about other people, all I can think is like, what's going on with you? Like, why do you feel so uncomfortable about what other people do in their own lives? And so they're sitting there wasting all their energy worrying about what other people are doing when they could be making a difference, or actually like going home and being a decent parent themselves, or contributing to society.
Yeah, creating those softer places to land for their children and their community when people are actually struggling, rather than always pushing people to be a certain way and to do things that align with this vision of what society tells us.
Yeah, which actually brings me to the beginning of my story.
Yes.
So I imagine these kids that grow up with parents who are these adults that feel the need to be so judgmental of others and spend all their energy caring what other people do.
Yeah.
Must feel very like they have to please this certain person's idea of who they should grow up to be. I didn't have that really in my family. You know, a little bit of pressure from the older generations perhaps, but my parents just couldn't care less about gender stereotypes and roles. And in fact, they probably went to particular effort to make sure that I felt I could do and be whoever I wanted to be.
Yeah.
You know, they didn't have like gender segregation on what activities people do or how you behave or anything like that.
Yeah.
There was one rule for all of us. I just never felt like there was a gender role pushed on me. So I did express when I was around 5 years old that I believed I should have a penis.
Right.
But that wasn't, I hadn't connected it up with like, oh, I'm a boy and so I need to perform a certain way. I'm also neurodivergent, so I think I didn't really... Everything I expressed to the outside world was me looking at what other people do and constructing a thing manually to be like, hello, here I am. And as a kid, I was very much like a tomboy. You know, I didn't really care what clothes... I didn't like wearing dresses.
Okay.
Yeah, so I guess my early childhood was relatively straightforward for me. I didn't feel too much need to express to anyone that I didn't feel like a girl.
Yeah.
And I did still feel a bit uncomfortable when I was referred to as a girl and people kind of called me out on that. I loved being in Scouts, for instance, because I thought that I looked quite boyish in my uniform, and I got very upset when I first joined and they gave me culottes instead of pants.
All right.
Yeah, in Australia we've had combined gendered Scouts for a long time. So the idea, I was like, ugh, guides, it's so girly. I bet they just sit there knitting. So I did take on some of that kind of toxic boyness.
Was there knitting involved?
Well, apparently there was a lot of craft and things in certain groups.
Okay.
Depends on the group and the leaders.
You're well into crafting, though.
I know. It's the funny thing. But, like, I was in Scouts to get in the dirt and, like, rough it and do bush survival and that sort of thing.
So you're, like, crocheting flak jackets and stuff?
Well, you do actually kind of crochet rope to store it.
Oh.
Like, if you have a super long rope that we use for rope bridges and stuff, you actually do a crochet chain to store it because it makes it a third of the size.
Wow.
Yeah.
Here I am thinking I'm making some silly jokes, and I end up learning some shit.
Yeah.
I love my life.
Well, that's a good thing with not, like, making gender barriers to crafts either, is you can combine a lot of what you learn from them to put it together.
Yeah. Although I have heard that, like, having a penis provides good counterweight for crochet needles. So maybe we've just been going in the wrong direction with this stuff the whole time.
No. The penis gets in the way of the crochet needles. The penis helps counterweight the hammers and,
I think
and
that's
the
a
drills.
posture problem if your penis is getting in the way of crochet needles.
Well, there has to be a reason that society has tried to, like, segregate these things, right?
That must be the reason.
Yeah.
It's all just been one big misunderstanding.
Some of the other things that would cause me dysphoria as a child was, like, when they were splitting us into girls and boy groups, and I would just get so upset and angry. I'm like, it's stupid, girls and boys are the same, like, why are they separating us? I would argue about it all the time. I hated gender segregated schools. I thought they were dumb. And I guess 'cause I felt like a boy in my brain, I couldn't understand why there would be times when girls would want to just be with girls and boys might just want to be with boys. But now when I'm in a male space and we just want to have time as men together, now I kind of get it, right? But I also don't like it if it's too exclusionary either.
I would question whether a lot of that has to do with the fact that when you're a child versus when you're an adult living in a particular gender context versus a child, you've experienced so many things from the outside related to that gender identity.
Yeah.
That makes it more beneficial for you.
Yeah. I guess some of the dynamics of relationships and friendships and even just, like, having space to talk about things that are maybe more vulnerable for your gender-specific needs. Like, also, if you've grown up as a woman, you've probably experienced some pretty hard shit.
Yeah.
And struggle with things to do with being a woman in this society. And you need that space to talk about it without men there, like, inputting their version of your experience, just as we need trans spaces and things like that. I mean, some of the men's spaces I have issues with where it almost seems like it's a space where they can be toxic without women jumping in and telling them off.
Yeah.
those I'm just kind of like, ugh.
Yeah. And that's one of the things, like, not to make this like, oh, but what about men for this conversation, but there are, like, a friend of mine used to run one of these men's spaces where one of the primary rules was we're not here to rap on women because that's not driving a conversation forward. It's not helping anyone. And a lot of these spaces designed for adults based on a gender identity are about healing, support, and moving forward that way. Whereas
A lot
for
of
kids, it feels like instructional.
Yes, yeah. Adult men, a lot of them have trouble expressing their emotions and things like that, and sometimes certain safe spaces for men, but a healthy safe space, makes it easier for them to be open with each other.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I get that a bit more these days, but yeah, as kids, there's so much less defining you, gender-wise.
Yeah.
But a big turning point for me in the dysphoria was hitting puberty. And I hit puberty pretty early. I was 11 when I started periods and was growing. My boobs grew pretty quickly. So by the time I was 12, I looked quite feminine. And I had some sort of idea in my head that once I started becoming a woman, I had to be a woman. Right. I don't know. I don't even know where I got it, because I always have played a role. Like, now that I understand that the neurodivergence, I didn't fit in the way I was. So I needed to play a character. But it felt even more important becoming an adult. Like, being an adult was to be more mature and to be more socially acceptable and to do things you didn't want to do. Maybe because my mum also kind of expressed that she felt this need to perform femininity.
Right.
And she was not that into the performing femininity thing. In fact, I bullied her into, like, doing more of it when I was a teenager, which I now realize was a bit of a projection.
Okay.
I was like, well, if I've got to wear dresses and put on makeup, you got to too.
Oh, so it's like misery loves company?
Yeah, I don't think my mum identifies that strongly with womanhood as such. Maybe I think she's told me more recently, that as she's got older, she's felt more at home in femininity. And it's really hard with this sort of thing to separate where it's cultural gender stereotypes versus your gender expression versus your actual gender identity.
Yeah.
And so I think a lot of people get that really confused. They're kind of like, well, I liked presenting more masculine when I was a kid, so clearly trans men are just girls that are confused that you can be a woman and be masculine. And I'm like, no.
Yeah.
Lots of trans guys start out as, like, very mask-presenting like, you know, like a butch lesbian or just a lot of them just butchy women. Or there's people like me where I really played up the femininity. I had really long hair. I used to, like, try and present this very... I see it now as, like, a bit of a safety blanket. It was a defense so people wouldn't know what I was actually feeling and thinking.
Right. Because
I did try telling a few people... And the thing was, they were the wrong people to try and open up to. I don't know why. People I had, like, romantic interest in or whatever, and obviously that's not going to go down so well when, It
can be challenging first date talk, can't it?
Yeah. I mean, the first person I tried telling was kind of like one of those people that everyone kind of assumed they were gay, but they never really said anything about it. So when I was just like, I kind of like you, and they're like, well, I'm kind of gay. I'm kind of like, yeah, that's kind of, I think, why there's an attraction. I always seem to be attracted to gay men and straight women for some crazy reason.
So it's like going out on a date and going, hey, can I see your penis? But it's more aspirational.
Yeah. it was more just kind of like, I am a boy, and I just keep being attracted to gay men, and I don't know, like, this doesn't work out in my head. And it took me a while. And that was the first time I really put it into words, like, I feel like I'm a boy. This was, I don't know, how long ago was this, like 14 years ago or something like that. It was just a less known and was seen more as pretty, I mean, it's not great these days even, but there was even less acceptance of trans people and even less known about trans men. I didn't even know you could be a trans man until I was like pretty much an adult. I had seen trans women in media, and when I was like an older teenager, there was like this news article about this pregnant man. I also had this like obsession with pregnant men my whole life. And I was like, what's up with that? And I think when you're a little girl, they tell you about how you're going to become a mummy. Yeah. That creepy, weird thing that people do to little girls.
It's like, let's talk about your uterus.
Yeah. You have a doll and they're all like, oh, you can pretend to be a mummy and all this sort of stuff. And I'm like, okay, so I'm going to have a baby, but I'm a boy. And so, like, I saw the movie Junior when I was quite young.
Oh, the Arnold Schwarzenegger?
Yeah. And there's an episode of Round the Twist where Peter gets pregnant from a tree spirit. And every time I saw it, like, there was this weird, something I didn't understand. I was just like, I'm very attracted to this idea. And as an adult, I've kind of put it down to, I was told that I would have babies, but feeling like a boy, it didn't make sense because they weren't telling the other boys that. And then there were these things where they're talking about boys having babies. And I was like, oh, these two things fit together now. These two ideas. And yeah, I was like every time it would come up in anything, there's mpreg stuff and fan fiction around as well. I used to pretend that my favorite Barbie dolls were my Ken dolls. They're the only ones I still remember the names, or they were the only ones I gave names to. My Barbies were just extra characters. But I would like make my Ken dolls pregnant. Like I would stuff things in their shirt.
Wow.
And none of it clicked for me until I really looked at it from the perspective hindsight.
Yeah. This is also poetic as hell, man.
Well, I mean, some people might just say, oh, well, you're just reading into it and you're making these things up after the fact. I'm like, well, a whole lot of thoughts happen and create who you are, so...
Yeah, and I mean, that's one reason I say it's not like reading into something that's not there, right? It's about expressing something that's intangible.
Yeah.
And it feels like by reflecting on this, you are... I mean, like, I've never heard anyone else talk about making their Ken dolls pregnant and stuff like that. It's so illustrative of something so interesting.
I certainly know, like, cis women who have said, like, they had similar interests, but it was more an external thing, whereas to me there was, like, that like, connection feeling in your heart. Like, when you're playing with your Barbies, right, you kind of... Enough with that connection. You put yourself into one of those roles when you're playing with dolls or role-playing. I assume girls more choose girls. Like, you choose someone that you identify with more. I always picked the boys. And just, I hated reading books that were from a perspective of a girl. I was like, no, I only read books where it's like a boy main character. I don't know if that has anything to do with that, but I did read some from girls' perspective, but I just didn't connect with them that well. was kind of like, oh, okay, odd. But yeah, so I was up to where I hit puberty, and I just started kind of deciding to put on this girl character. It was also because, like, in Scouts, which was my main social outlet, my best friend there was a girl, but that was, I guess, we always had to be together, so we just got along.
And where were you living at the time?
Far North Queensland, so I was in the Torres Strait as a kid, and then I was in Cairns from 11 till 18.
Okay.
And yeah, the boys started treating me different when I started becoming more feminine. And yeah, it just stopped feeling the same. They went from being bros to being like guys that saw me as not one of them. And so I stopped going. I quit when I was about the year I turned 13, so I was probably still 12. But my best friend from there was going to a private school, so I went to follow her there. And yeah, my dad ended up getting a job there. So I also got into the Christianity thing there because it was a private school, you know, Christian, and because most private schools are Christian. And that kind of changed things as well, because I was getting these like subtle, the whole like, we don't like queers.
Yeah.
It was always just something subtle out there that you knew wasn't really accepted. You know, maybe something queer was mentioned or it came on TV and people would just switch away or kind of scoff, or it would be really hard to pinpoint why I felt that way, but I'm sure it was just some subtle thing like that. So I started pushing down more of that part of me. There's a real kind of like these groups where you have to be the same. Like they don't like difference.
Yeah.
So I think I started trying to fit this very stereotypical like good Christian girl. I looked like I was all like blonde and goody two shoesy, and I mean I was always a goody two shoes.
I was
like
gonna say like,
but
were you a gritty youth in those days?
no, I was always a people pleaser, and I would push down my own desires for the sake of acceptance and making people happy. And I don't know how much of that comes from having low self-esteem, or it doesn't take too many times of people like telling you don't do things right or you're different for you to stop feeling like you are worthy.
Yeah.
And being neurodivergent, it pretty quickly you get the message that you're not right.
Yeah. That
So
everything you do just to get through a day is somehow rude or awkward.
yeah.
It's like, well, yeah, okay, go away then.
Yeah, what you say, how you say it, or how you behave, like fiddling with stuff is rude and you're not paying attention. Or
I used to get told off for like blinking
oh
really hard.
yeah, the autistic blink. Yeah. In high school, I loved drama and things when I was a teenager, and the drama class was mostly girls. There was a couple of other boys, but you know, characters in plays and things often have equal numbers of boys and girls. So there would often be like, oh, we need someone else to play a boy, and I would always be like, I'll do it. Oh no, I have to dress up in guys' clothes and present masculine, and oh, how terrible. But it felt safe to do it that way because, oh, I'm just acting.
Yeah. And you're obeying someone's command. You're pleasing a people.
Yeah, exactly.
As a people pleaser is wont to do.
Exactly. So I hadn't heard about transness either, so I had never clicked. I didn't know why having periods and having boobs and everything was so uncomfortable. The penis missing has been like my main dysphoria my whole life. Like a big moment for me was my parents saved my whole life because they wanted to take us on a trip through Europe when we were still kids.
Yeah.
And so when I was 14 and my brother was like 11, 12, we traveled Europe for 6 months in this crappy old camper van that we spent like, I don't know, third of our trip just stopped by the side of the road, Dad fixing this crappy broken, would sleep on the side of the road, not in a campsite and things like that to save money. But we went to the Louvre and there's this really lovely statue of the Greek god Hermaphroditus, and they're laid out on this bed, kind of twisted in a way that you can see this like beautiful kind of feminine upper body with breasts, and then as you come around, they have just a tiny little penis and all, and just so delicately laid out in the bed. And I was just like, another one of those like feelings of connection. I was just like, so beautiful.
Well, no, hang on, Meka. I thought that transiness was invented in like by the woke agenda in like 2020 or something. You're telling me this concept existed before that?
Apparently the last, it was one of the last emperors of Rome, had all of these people out looking for a doctor somewhere within the empire who could turn them into a woman.
Wow.
Who would be able to make them a woman. I mean, in lots of cultures, there's oral history of transness throughout their history.
Yep. Two-spirit people.
Yeah. Certain cultures had rules against stepping outside of your gender role, but many cultures have not. Many cultures have just been like, okay, cool. If that makes you happy, chill over there.
Yeah. And then colonization smashed that out of a lot of different communities.
Yeah. It just happens that the culture that has dominated much of the world is one where gender roles are strictly enforced. Thank goodness for feminism, right?
Yeah.
Because it has very much been one of the things that has made being trans acceptable, because those women stepped up and said, we're not going to accept the role you're forcing on us. And that opened the doors to more people stepping up and saying, we don't accept what this lot you have assigned us. But where am I getting back on track?
So hermaphroditus.
Yeah. Oh, I also, that trip, we had a digital camera. It was the first time we got like a good digital camera. And there was just all like these close-ups of penises on statues and things. And my parents just thought I was really straight. Like, yeah, Mika's just into penises for that reason. But no, like...
And how old were you when you were when you had this compendium of peni?
14.
Okay.
Like, I was already like, you know, I was well into puberty.
Okay.
So I had a boyfriend back in Australia.
Right.
But yeah, they thought, yes, I had interest in men as well, but I would say the majority of my penis-related interest most of my life was actually from a perspective of like me wanting my own penis. And even when I've been with partners, there's a lot of me just vicariously living through them. Like I kind of want to like switch positions in my head. And my body often felt like this person that I was puppeteering from the outside, like this woman who I was conducting, but I felt so not her. She's like a really good friend I had along the way. I don't feel badly towards her. She carried me through life until I could find me.
That's so beautiful.
Yeah, she really felt like this other person. And I was almost... I used to have this vision of this big brother, and I was like, oh, I wonder what it'd be like to have a big brother. But it was almost like that was me. Like, I was the big brother, and the body I lived in was this sister. So she was like a sister to me.
Yeah.
And I guess that's why I also don't kind of see that as like a dead identity. I don't want her to be dead.
Yeah.
She was someone special. And so I still look back fondly upon her, but it was like I was a ghost.
Yeah.
I was a ghost with no body. And so she had to go away for me to live.
Oh, it's so fascinating hearing your take on that, like your very personal experience with it, because it's not always like that for a lot of people, is it?
No. A lot of trans people don't want to talk about the before times. Like, it's completely just triggers bad memories.
Yeah.
And totally understandable. And I guess that's why you shouldn't, just a message to everyone out there, you shouldn't bring up that with a trans person. Like, if they want to talk to you about it, they've opened the door, and then I'm sure it's fine to ask a few more questions.
Yeah.
But you kind of want to let someone else lead those questions if it's a difficult topic. I mean, it goes for anyone.
Yeah.
Like, don't ask them about stuff that might bring up bad memories.
Yes. And I'm so glad you said that, because this is something that happens a lot with different marginalized communities when there's someone who's acting from a place of compassionate curiosity and they just want to keep asking and asking and asking. It's like, no, I want to become a better ally through the process of you gently walking me through your trauma so I can look around and go, ooh, I can walk away feeling more educated. You're going to feel depleted. And then I'm going to go, bye, and then blog about it and like make $1 million.
And don't think about that maybe you have other things to talk about in your life than this one thing. Like, if everyone does that, that's all that person ever gets to talk about.
Yeah, yeah.
And I mean, I always offer up like, hey, if you want to ask weirdly inappropriate questions to a trans person, ask me. I don't really care, and I kind of have fun talking about it.
Yeah.
But no, this is a very, like, specific invite.
Yes.
And
this is an invite to Meka.
Yeah, I'm inviting you to ask me these questions so you don't ask them of other random trans people because they deserve to live their life. And I go through periods where I'm just kind of like, you know what, I'm done. I just want to be an average person that doesn't have to talk about this all the time or think about it. And, you know, I'll just say to people, I'm like, I'm not in the mood for talking about that right now.
Yeah.
But
and that has to be okay.
Yeah.
There are people who will take such offense to you not wanting to answer their questions because, but I have a pure heart and I'm trying to, this is how I'm showing love. And you're just a mean person if you don't want to give that to me.
I just normally say, like, oh, there's some YouTubers who just are so much better at, like, discussing this than me. You should look them up sometime. They just can give you everything you want to know.
Yeah. Sometimes when I'm in a similar position, just related to other marginalizations I have, I'll say things like, take me out for lunch sometime and maybe we'll talk about it.
Yeah.
Depending on who it is.
That's true, yeah. Sometimes I do have the whole, like, let's chat, like when we did that get-together, you and I, to practice podcasting where I told you all about transness.
Yeah.
Because I just, I do enjoy it when it's the right time.
Yeah, because you've put yourself in the place of someone who is, to a degree, an educator on this subject.
Yeah, I try to know as much as I can about the different experiences of trans people.
Yeah, so you've you've self-nominated as a type of ambassador for some aspect of the experience, but not a single representative of everyone's experience.
Yeah.
Because no group is a monolith.
No, and I do try to listen to as many experiences as I can from different trans and non-binary people so that I can have perspective on the different experiences, and other than trying to have empathy for it, I can only assume as much as I can about their experience, but for all I know, it's completely different. Like, I've spoken to people where they're like, I felt so strongly that I'm a boy or a girl from when I was really little, and have like every step of the way, they rejected everything about being female. They were like, no, I'm a boy their whole life.
Yeah.
And their family just like, ugh, look at these children being silly.
Yeah.
And they just like strongly express that their whole life.
Yeah.
Whereas I just could not defy people like that. They were like, no, you're a girl. And I'm like, oh, okay. Like, I was very compliant. And I guess like being a tomboy, or once I started femming up, I still very much practiced my masculine skills, you know, in masculine.
Do that voice thing again.
Masculine skills. Like, I liked doing tech at high school, like the woodwork, metal workshop stuff. And I was good at it. Like, I was better than most other people in the workshop classes. But I also did the femme things as well. I just like anything hands-on.
Yeah.
But I took a lot of pride in being able to fix my car, or build something, or weld, or do something like coded masculine in our society. And that was my like little defiance of not complying with femininity completely.
Yeah.
I don't know. It's everyone's so different. It's really hard to just say like, oh, well, you're not trans because you didn't fit this particular way of being trans.
Yeah. One very fond memory I have from our friendship, because, you know, we go back, several months.
Oh, it's probably been a few years now.
No, probably like a year.
Feels like longer than that. Because it's been a year and a half.
You that much?
No, it's been about a year and a half.
Okay, all right, cool.
Yeah.
On my birthday, which has traditionally been quite a challenging time for me, and was shaping up to be very challenging again, when you invited me and Tony and Qualia over to your place, and one of the things that you showed us was a photo album that your mother had put together when you were 21.
Yeah.
Where it was very much you before transition, and like just through that whole period of your life. And I remember, if you don't mind me getting a little bit emo, looking at all these pictures of my buddy, and feeling that sense of like gratitude for this person who is still very much you.
Yeah.
It was a side of you that I hadn't ever met in person, because I've only ever known, you know, all caps Meka.
A sexy, hairy, masculine Meka.
The hirsute Meka. And I don't know, I felt this like twinge of like, oh, this was the person who like took care of you all these years, and kind of helped cultivate my buddy.
Yeah.
And look at that smile, and and with my little kid looking through all of these pictures with such fascination, just like, wow, pretty girl, blah blah blah, and all this stuff. And it was just, it didn't feel weird at all. I didn't feel like I was going to have to explain something huge to her later.
Yeah.
She knew that was you too.
Yeah.
I have such hope for the younger generations around all this stuff.
Yeah. My nephew has, because we were going through family photos from when we were younger.
Yeah.
And being like, oh, that's Uncle Meka.
Yeah, yeah.
And so he got a little bit like, not confused, but he went through a little bit of period being like, but you're a girl. And I'm like, no, those photos, like, people thought I was a girl when I was born, and I didn't know how to tell people.
Yeah.
But I'm actually a boy.
Yeah.
And it took like a couple of just kind of going through it in a few different ways, and he was like, oh, okay.
Yeah. See, stories like that are one of the reasons that this silly bullshit argument that people use against like the existence and recognition of trans people. It's like, it's too confusing to our children. It's like, have you ever met a kid who wasn't fucking confused all the time about everything?
And surprisingly, not every kid that gets this explained to them suddenly goes, oh, well, I'm a boy or I'm a girl.
Yeah.
Like,
it's not an indoctrination.
No. And I'm sure there are some kids that go, oh, I feel like a girl or I feel like a boy. And that, yeah. And then they get to actually live as their true self.
Yeah.
And just because a few people do that, most kids don't. Most kids are just like, oh, okay, that's interesting.
Yeah.
But I'm still a boy or I'm still a girl.
Yeah. With so many things in life. Kids aren't these creatures that are just set up to instantly understand everything. Everything that they're taking in is something that they're interpreting, that they're learning about.
Mm-hmm.
Understanding the context in which this particular idea fits into the world.
Well,
transness, gender, non-binary identities, anything to do with the gender spectrum or sexuality. That is not the one thing that's gonna suddenly make your kid go, oh, you mean I'm not a super genius who just knows everything? Kids aren't stupid. Like they can learn about these things.
One big mistake you're making there is that you raise your kid to be a critical thinker and to actually learn, whereas the people who think that we're indoctrinating people indoctrinate their kids. They say, no, you will be our religion. You will do things this way. You will hold a very strong gender stereotype. Yeah. And follow these gender roles. Yeah. And if the kid says no, they get punished until they comply.
Yeah. And I guess, to be fair, I did name my daughter Qualia.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I've explained to you a bit what that word means, right? Should I tell the story? I don't think I've told the story on the podcast.
Know. Yeah.
Because it kind of helps to provide a little context about where we're coming from each on this. So the word qualia, people often ask, like, oh, how'd you come up with that name? Like, where's it from? And it's like, it's not technically, like, a name. Yeah. Like, you're not going to find it in a baby book. Yeah. It's a philosophical concept.
Oh.
Yeah. So it has the same root word as the word quality.
Oh.
Yeah. It's the collective term for the raw sensory perceptions that we each have in our minds that cannot be measured from one person to the next because of barriers around language and communication.
Yeah.
So it's things like, my phone case, much of what I own, is purple.
Yep.
My purple might be your tangerine.
Yeah.
We have no way of knowing that.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why it's important to recognize that different people's perceptions, you really have no way of knowing how people are perceiving things. It's an invitation to question and critically look at everything and accept that people have different perceptions. So that's what my kid's name means.
That's very cool. It's one of the big realizations I had as an adult fairly recently. So many people project the way they see the world on everyone else and make assumptions and moralistic judgments based on, well, I feel this way. They must also think and act in the same way. So them doing that equals bad or equals good or no. Until you can accept that someone might be so different from yourself that their whole thought process is completely different, you're never going to be able to compassionately interact with people.
Yeah.
And it's better to just kind of go, I don't have any idea what their experience is. Let me assume the best.
Yeah.
And work backwards from there.
Yeah. Or at least make room for that to be an acceptable thing.
Yeah. And I mean, I sometimes get a bit of shit from the liberal side of things too, because I'm maybe too compassionate towards
So by
people.
that you mean the left?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because
Like,
I know here in Australia,
oh,
liberal means
liberals
something
are
different from like.
the conservative. I
Yeah.
mean, our conservatives are still like quite centrist. Like they don't dare discuss completely removing universal healthcare or anything like that.
Oh yeah, no.
I try and be compassionate to everyone. So when someone is being disgusting and gross, I try and be like, all right, well, why do they think that way? What has happened in their life to make them think these things?
Yeah.
And like, they don't necessarily, if they're being poisonous and creating harm, do they really deserve that compassion? To me, I see it as a way of finding common ground and maybe being able to communicate with them and being able to explain my experience, because they are far more open to me when I kind of approach them with oh, it's really interesting you think that way. I don't see it the same way. Maybe we should look and find why we have such a different view of the world.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I've discussed it before on the podcast, how I like kind of being in those men's spaces and kind of when something toxic comes up, just kind of curious, doing the curious, oh, really, what?
Yeah, you sprinkle flower seeds over that shit.
Yeah, yeah. I think there's different approaches and we need those different approaches. Like, neither one is wrong.
Yeah.
So, like, my compassionate approach is useful in some situations.
Yeah.
And in others, all it does is, like, lets the evil people off the hook. And it's very specific which situation has the right approach. And if I don't have the energy to do it the other way, I kind of try and be a support to those of you that know how to yell better. Like, I'm a support person. I put on the picnic for y'all to come and rest at afterwards, you know. Though I sometimes get in the mood for yelling or playing the malicious compliance card.
Yeah.
Like, follow the letter of the law, like right down the line.
Just thought of a business idea for you.
Yeah.
Picnics against the patriarchy.
Ooh.
So you set up picnics that people can kind of attend at the end of like a march or a rally.
Hell yeah. Let me know when there's rallies where they need a picnic at the end. I've got all the stuff.
I do have a friend who brings tea to them. You've probably met him.
I have a giant tea set for putting on tea parties in the park of, like, you know, secondhand cheap stuff.
Picnics against the patriarchy.
Yeah, let's do it.
Coming to a gritty alley near you.
Sponsored by Thriving Between the Lines.
Oh,
yeah. So, getting back on topic, because our ADHD is just going off. Where were we?
We were talking about...
I mean, the last time I remember a specific thing was the Louvre and all the penises.
Well, let's not beat ourselves up to get exactly back on the track that we were. What if we dive in a bit to the kind of personal development messaging that impacted you through your transition journey and how those things kind of impact you now?
Yeah, sure. First, I'll talk about a few things that were anti-helping me, personal development things.
Yeah.
And a lot of that was from the Christian groups.
Yeah.
There was like this whole not anti-dating book going around when I was a teenager, like I Kiss Dating Goodbye or something like that. And basically it was just like, oh, dating is bad and you just have to know people and you spend time with them like in groups and then suddenly you kind of get engaged.
Get to know each other over the honeymoon.
Yeah, it was very much this like, I don't know, very conservative, like probably mummy and daddy were supposed to set up your marriage for you. Who knows? And it was gross. Anyway, it meant that a lot of my young adulthood in the groups I was hanging out with and quite like evangelical Christian groups, which are surprising. I always thought when I was younger that evangelical Christian groups were going to be more progressive and more open. And then I found out they were actually far more conservative, at least the ones I was hanging around. And particularly the ones that insert themselves into the universities. All of those, there's so many Christian groups in the universities, but a lot of the ones that do all these like social gatherings and like, oh, just come, we're just super friendly and nice.
And then it's an Amway pitch.
And
it's all Bibles.
Yeah, and then they invite you to the churches they're involved with, and then they start, you know, pushing their version of Christianity. And thankfully, they hit on a subject that was one of those make or break subjects for me, which is women need to be subservient to men. And my mum brought me up to never accept that shit. So no matter how much like brainwashing I was subject to, that one wasn't going to fly with me. Yeah. And because it was one of those gender things where they're like, oh, girls are this way and boys are that way. So they were telling me that there was no way I was ever going to get to live my truth, even if I didn't have a good language for it. And that was a big turning point for me. I was involved with those lot when that was happening, and then I had signed up to do exchange at uni. And so I went over to the UK, totally just me, in a totally new place, strangers everywhere, and it was a way to start again, like without having to worry about what my family would think or what the people in my community would think. Just live differently and see what happens with that safety of not being, no repercussions, basically. I could leave it all behind and go back to my old life if I wanted to. Yeah. That's not the case. I actually started to discover myself, and it was during that exchange that I realized that I felt like a boy, and I tried telling someone.
Right. So it was like a little Rumspringa for you.
It was very Rumspringa. And I made a best friend on the first day of the international week. The international students came a week early so that you could do a bit of like getting to know each other and getting to know the town, and they would help you set up bank accounts and things, and doing the stuff you have to do being international. And there was someone I saw from my university in Australia, and she was standing with him, and I said hello to him, and then she was just like, hello. And she was very good at breaking my little shell. Like, I mean, I was already starting to crack the shell myself, but she gave me a hand in not accepting bullshit from me. So when I had a lot of internalized homophobia and transphobia and stuff, and I would sometimes say, often enough, would say crap like using gay as a word for bad, and like kind of being a bit like just queer people. And she would just be like, why? And I'd be like, she's like, well, if you can explain it, I'll accept it. But, and then turn out I had no explanation, and she's like, well, then don't do it. And I'm like, woo, okay.
I like this friend.
Oh, she's awesome. But yeah, she also dragged me along to clubs that were nerdy. Took me to Sci-Fi Fantasy Society, which opened up a whole new world. Yeah. I've always been a nerd, but I really tried covering it up when I was a teenager. Well, when I started uni, I tried to do a whole, like, oh, I'm totally cool thing. And tried to kill off the nerd in me. And turns out you can't do that. Yeah. The nerd is always there.
There's always a banana peel waiting to just knock you off of that high horse. It's like, no. But suddenly you get that tape circle in the middle of your glasses. It's like, it's following me.
And the thing with the nerdy community is it's far more accepting of differences. Yeah. There's very much an acceptance of, like, people don't have to be the same. Yeah. And there were queer folk in that group as well as non-binary, and that me meeting some non-binary people really opened my eyes. I was like, because I was always like, yeah, but I'm not a guy because I don't this, and this. But it was like toxic masculinity stuff. I'm like, oh, but I like feeling emotions. So pretty much from then on, I had opened my eyes to the world, came back, started a version of Sci-Fi Fantasy Society here at my uni, and met some people who introduced me to other people in the world. And I did come out as bisexual while I was over in the UK. Not super publicly, but yeah, just starting to get to know more people made it feel more acceptable to be different.
Yeah.
But it still took me a long time. I got into a relationship with someone who ended up being quite emotionally abusive. He was also the first person I got physically intimate with. And it was like immediate. I was like, oh, this genital arrangement is not correct. Like it was the final straw in the like, okay, there was supposed to be a penis on me.
Wow.
Yeah, it was like less than a month into being sexually active. I said to him, I'm like, I kind of have to close my eyes and pretend I got a penis to enjoy this.
Wow.
And he was just like, okay, that's gross and weird. And so I just pushed that deep down. It was probably another 5 years until I dared say it to another person. But I mean, I did go on Reddit a few times on some groups there and was kind of like, I feel something.
It's wild too, because like the Reddit community is so diverse in its way of reacting to these sorts of things.
Yeah, I mean, the reactions I got on those subreddits, like genderqueer or something, were all very like supportive and
good.
Like kind of, it's your journey and like you need to just explore it yourself. And if you want to, you know, they were supportive.
Very carefully chosen subreddits.
Yes.
Well done. It's not like, am I the asshole for telling my partner that da-da-da-da-da?
Oh yeah,
no,
that would have just like really got me bottled back up if I'd gone on like stray Reddit full of like the toxic douchebags that would have just been like blah, 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 fake news.
You are fake news.
Pretty
you don't
much
actually exist.
I mean, that's the story that we hear a lot.
Yeah.
I also started exploring like the science behind transness and saw that there is actually like a fairly good consensus in the medical community that transition is the only way to deal with being trans. Like you're not going to, one, you can't change someone's brain, and two, it would be unethical to, because who is someone other than the way their brain functions and puts together all their experiences in the world? You would be destroying a human.
So in the context of books like Who Moved My Cheese, where does your transition fit in there?
In Who Moved My Cheese?
Yeah.
I guess I was running around looking for cheese in my maze, but the cheese was me. And
the cheese was me.
To tell you the truth, that book has faded from my mind fairly quickly.
You blocked it out.
I was just
the
like,
trauma.
something, moving cheese, don't be lazy, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah. See, this is the thing. Like, when we talked about Who Moved My Cheese in an earlier episode of our podcast, that book was very much like, don't worry about who's moving the cheese. It's not society's problem. Like, you are the one who has to just adapt no matter what, no matter what, no matter what.
Yeah.
That way of thinking, ironically, I feel would be in contrast to saying, like, you need to transition, because the context of the book, I feel like it creates this weird tail chasing thing, because the message behind that book is kind of, no, you just have to suck it up and deal with the fact that people don't think you should exist.
Yeah, it's basically is saying like, you need to comply and do things the way the world says if you ever want to get the rewards. But that is like very much this idea of well, these rewards that society sees as a reward, like money and power and success, is like, okay, cool. And I did have to do a lot of kind of I was not thriving. I was barely surviving. I actually, one of the breaking points is I just went, I can't do this anymore. It's either break or make or break right now. I'm going to top myself if there isn't a better reason or another way through this world. And I kind of sat there and went, when was the last time I was happy? Because I'd been happy before. It wasn't a lifelong thing. And I was like, when I was about 10, like 10 or maybe 11, and then I started being sad. I'm like, what happened at that time? Oh, I hit puberty. I started feeling like I needed to be a girl. I stopped like just doing the things I liked and started trying to be someone else. And that's when I pulled that box back out, and instead of being scared, because I was already at the end of the line, right? It's not as scary when you've come to the point of like, it's not like life will have to change. It's like life will get to continue. So looking at it differently from like, oh, I'll lose all these things and things will be different. I'd already decided I was going to lose all those things.
Yeah.
This was an option that let me keep living and to see if there was some happiness available.
And some would call that like an illustration of radical acceptance, to then make that quite significant change that you needed to make.
Yeah. I don't love that it had to be that way. Like, there is kind of this idea that it's only acceptable to transition if you were, like, gonna top yourself otherwise. Trigger warning for the whole episode. But that's been a lot of the story. Like, oh, we have to let trans people medically transition because otherwise they will kill themselves. Okay, what? Was letting someone just be happy not an option?
Yeah.
I don't want the next generation of trans people to have to choose between death and life. I want them to choose between happiness and or fulfillment, or not have to choose at all. Like, just let people be themselves and stop caring about what other people do.
Yeah.
I don't love that that's how I had to come to it, but I love that I held on long enough to make the right choice, to get to a point now where overall I think I could just say that I'm pretty content. Happiness is something that you don't want to feel all the time. You'd be a psycho if you're just always happy. Contentment is what I'm aiming for. And I'm very content a lot of the time. My chronic illness has been making me feel not very content recently.
Yeah.
But that should be expected when you're struggling with chronic illness. Like, it's very hard to be content when life is a bit of a struggle.
Yeah.
But with who I am and who I see in the mirror and that sort of stuff, even though I am far from perfect, like, I'm just like, yeah. You're Meka.
Yeah. Meka exclamation.
Because that was one of the things that like held me back from transitioning as well. A lot of people would tell me how pretty I was, and I was kind of like, oh, I shouldn't waste my pretty. Like, I shouldn't waste it.
Yeah.
Like, I was gifted with this good luck in being attractive in a world where people value attractiveness. So I should just, like, embrace it. But turns out, doesn't matter how good looking you are, that's not going to make you happy or content.
Yeah. Who knew?
Yeah.
I mean, like, I'm, like, hot as fuck, right?
Yeah. You're a nice looking lady.
And I'm, like, miserable half the time. No, I wouldn't say that.
I mean,
but I just
well,
think,
it doesn't treat you better.
No.
There is some pretty privilege, but...
I mean, like, I walk through the street sometimes and I'm like, you know what? I'm just so damn beautiful. Why am I struggling so hard today?
Yeah, well, also a lot of the pretty privilege is white pretty privilege. Like
Yep.
I was the cliche, like pretty blonde, innocent looking. The societal projection is like good, Aryan looking, blue eyed, blonde haired, pretty girl that like
gracefully goose stepping through life.
Yeah.
Without a care in the world.
Yeah. It wasn't until I stepped outside of that world that I was like, oh, not everyone. Because I kept meeting I'm meeting pretty people, and I'm like, oh, you know how everyone just like gives you things, and they'd be like, what the fuck are you talking about? And I realized that was a particular experience. And so there probably was some selfishness on my part there too, that there was a certain level of pretty privilege, but there was also disadvantages as well. Like being targeted and for worse than not so nice things, and being considered the dumb blonde sort of stereotype.
Yep.
Yeah. Well, not worth it. But it was probably, getting back to where we were, it was probably after that when I decided it was time to just cut my losses and start transition. And I didn't like have a strong idea of like, oh, I'm going to go from a girl to a boy. I was just like, you know what, maybe I'm gender fluid or something, because some days I was chill with like the makeup and the hair and the dresses, and other days I was just like, ugh, boy shirt and jeans. And I was just like, I'll just express myself however I feel. Yeah. But I didn't want the long hair anymore, so I cut that off. And yeah, I started then my more of that inner journey, and you know, looking at self-help books. I mean, my mum had been giving me self-help books since I was a teenager, like read lots of Chicken Soup for the Soul, which isn't quite the same. It's more just like uplifting type stuff. Yeah. And then there was like Rainbow Parachute or something. Or
what color is your parachute?
Yeah, that one.
Yeah.
What color is your parachute? And there's some organizational one on like how to get organized. And then, I don't know, she's probably the person who gave me most of the books that I have read some of and got sick of a third the way through, like most of them. It just, like, I get to a point where they hit a point, some thing that I just like, nope. And then that ADHD thing of needing to be invested, once it's dead, I just can't keep going. Like, I read a paragraph and I'm like, like I just fall asleep. But I did start reading more psychology type things and things based in, I can't even remember titles anymore. Yeah. But I started seeing psychologists because for one, it was part of what you have to do to get medical access. Yeah. But two, I realized that I needed to work out this. Felt like a cloud of muddle in my brain, and I wanted to start tidying it up and working it out. And through that, I started like hearing theories and approaches that then had me Googling for things, and I'd find a YouTube video that would mention another theory or a book, so that would have me reading bits and pieces. I rarely read a book from front to back. I just flick through it and see the interesting stuff. They shouldn't make a table of contents if they don't want me to shortcut. And it just was this amalgam of a whole lot of different approaches, and some things would make sense or hit for me and some wouldn't, which I now realize is how psychology works. For years I was like, these all don't work together, so it doesn't make sense. And then I realized, because different people think different ways. Yeah. Yeah, and it's just been a pretty long journey of that. I had started seeing psychologists previous to that, particularly at uni while I was really struggling there, and they had started putting some of those questions in my mind of like, what do I really want? What are my values? What drives me? And I think they also were trigger points for me sitting there and going like, what is it that I really want? What am I doing this for?
Yeah.
Like, you can't just live for the sake of being alive. You can't live for other people.
Correct.
I mean, you can exist, but you can't live.
Yeah.
And I was existing. I couldn't take myself to end it all because I knew it would destroy my family.
So you were surviving between the lines, but not thriving between the lines.
I barely would say surviving. I was more existing. I was almost like the living dead. I barely felt like I was there. A lot of it feels like this mist of an existence.
Like a fog?
Fog. And as I said, it was like I was conducting someone else's life and I was a ghost. No one saw me. They saw this girl, this sister of mine.
Yeah.
But I was just this imaginary being outside of that. And it really did feel like I've only just like been slowly coming into focus, becoming a real person in the world. And I think it's why I feel so much more alive and have purpose and drive. And suddenly you look towards your future and you can imagine yourself, like I can imagine myself as an old man surrounded by family and growing up. Whereas before I would look forward to a future and there was nothing there. I couldn't see it. And the thought of like trying to imagine myself as an old woman was like, no, I just couldn't see it. And it's really a strange experience. And that's my experience. I'm sure it's different for other people.
Yeah.
But I'm very visual.
Yeah.
And I do remember once, and it probably has to do with the type of epilepsy I have, where it does create a bit of an out-of-body experience. And I didn't get treatment for that until I was 21. And so I used to often feel unconnected to my body anyway. But even after treatment, I still felt that disconnect. Right. But I very much remembered like moments where someone would bump into me and say like, excuse me. And I would get freaked out because they saw me. I was like, they can see me.
I'm being perceived.
Yeah. It's just, all those experiences are just a whole other story of weirdness. But yeah, it's just nice to feel like a real person, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And I think now when I see me in the mirror, that person, I know that everyone I see out in public sees that person too. And it feels really empowering to be seen, to not be invisible anymore. Yeah. And they don't see the whole experience of who I am, but it just, to someone who has spent a lifetime feeling invisible, being seen at all is incredibly important.
Yes.
And I think I even appreciate the fact that I do blend in a bit. I'm not the best looking guy or anything like that. I'm fun. I'm average. I'm cool.
You're
I just
a
blend
cutie.
it. Adorable. But, I just feel like a person in society, which is nice. Like, yeah.
It's like, finally.
Yeah. But not every trans person has that privilege. And that's, I think, why I feel so indignant at the judgment of trans people, and particularly this stereotype of a trans woman who offends people's sensibilities of what a woman should look like.
Just by existing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Particularly while they're also trying to push for the removal of rights of access to puberty blockers and things like that. The things that would actually allow future generations of trans people to fit society's expectations more, which also helps a trans person, because gender identity is very much tied into society's expectations of gender.
Yes.
Without that external expectation, I'm sure what we feel we need to be ourselves would be different. In different cultures, I'm sure there's different needs and wants for gender expression.
And that leaks into legislation in different countries and things like that as well. It's so important for people to understand, and you've stated it a number of times in different ways, that trans people aren't just one monolithic group who all have the same experience and should be perceived and treated as that. It's individual people we're talking about here.
Yeah. And there's loads of people in the world that couldn't give a stuff about what other people see or think of them. They're not into complying with expectations.
Yeah. And there are also trans people who are deeply conservative.
Yeah.
Which weirds me out, but hey, it's not my job to understand what is happening in everyone.
Yeah. And I'm sure there's part of that to do with wanting to fit into the community you are part of.
Yeah.
But yeah, just like people need to be who they are. I don't know how many times everyone has to say it, like, stop making everyone try and be the same as you.
Yeah.
They're not going to be, and you're going to be very disappointed.
Yeah, who wants to hang out with little clones of themselves anyway?
Yeah. Stopping caring what people thought of me was a big part of what I had to accept.
Yeah.
Like, removing that validation by others' view of me was so important. And while you value yourself on that, you're pretty much not going to have a great time.
Yeah.
And I guess there is a very certain amount of white privilege that probably caused some of that too, because I had, like, pretty white privilege, because I automatically got that acceptance.
Yeah.
There's lots of people in the world where you never had it, so reject it. Like, there's the option to reject it or never be, there was never an option.
Yeah.
But I do sometimes feel that it is one of the reasons there is a bit of that lack of empathy and understanding that comes from certain segment of society that has stepped straight into a world where, I mean, it's different. Like, I'm talking about our community, where that particular look is what is the standard bar that everyone has been set at.
Yeah.
And everyone that doesn't meet that is expected to claw their way up to it.
Yeah.
It's different in each community and country, Once I rejected that and I accepted that I was gonna be a freak, like, that was kind of like my thoughts at the time, like, I'm gonna be considered a freak by a lot of people, and that people aren't gonna understand and all of that. But I just kind of was like, I don't care anymore. Yeah. It was a breaking of the person I was, and just the throwing out the excess crap that wasn't needed.
Yeah.
And I started my medical transition maybe 6 months after that with hormones, and then a few more years till I got top surgery. And very luckily, I was able to start bottom surgery as well not too long after. I think I've been transitioning now for like 8 or 9 years.
Right.
And I'm nearly finished the phalloplasty. Well, this part of it, it's a maintenance sort of, it's often requires maintenance because of how complicated all of it is. But hopefully not too much. I certainly understand why everyone gets so tired through the process. I'm very exhausted, and it takes a lot of resources and your body is pretty on alert. I'm sure it sets your nervous system to the we're in danger zone, being that attacked. Like the surgeries themselves, your body doesn't know what's going on. So my body's tired, and I am very looking forward to it being done for the time being. But I also finally feel very at peace in my body.
I love that. And what kinds of practices or things you do help maintain that feeling of being at peace with your body and your identity?
Grounding is important because I spent a lifetime practicing not being here in my body, like disassociating. So it's a new experience to pull myself back down to earth and not be distressed by it. So now when I do grounding and feel in my body and hear in the here and now, I can actually find peace and joy in that instead of it being a distressing experience. And it's like a new experience, I guess, to be able to do that. Because even before bottom surgery, I was a lot happier, but it was still a bit of a challenge. And I'm still learning to get used to my body. Oh, yeah. I just realized you're like one of my few friends that I haven't shown my penis to. I'm very proud of it. I think it's because we're always in like a more like public setting or like official setting.
Official.
Yeah, or your child's around.
Oh, yeah.
And
yeah, that's interesting.
like as soon as I had it, I was like at my party of friends that have been supporting me in my preparation for surgery and everything, and I'm just like, who wants to see the penis? Showed it all off. Took a video for the surgeon.
Of the party, of the reaction.
Of the like just after the reveal, I'm like, everyone say hi to Hans.
So where some people have like a gender reveal party, you had a sex reveal party.
Yes, exactly.
See, that I can get behind.
Yeah.
Just need to make a quick disclaimer. This is very much a me thing.
Yeah.
And don't ever ask trans people about their genitals.
No.
If they offer it up, like I do, feel free.
Yeah.
I'll let you know.
Yeah. Otherwise, it ain't your business.
Yeah. And no one's genital. Just don't ask about people's private stuff. Like, weird.
Yeah.
I mean, most people, when you spend $100,000 on something, you show it off. Like, you get a car that's worth that much, you're like, look at my nice car.
Yeah.
It's always consensual, and I make sure everyone in the vicinity is consenting of the revealing of the genitalia.
Yeah.
But, so I'm always like, anyone here uncomfortable with it? Okay, we'll have to go to another room, or
Yeah.
do you mind turning around for a moment?
See, I wish people with like those really obnoxiously expensive cars would be a little bit more considerate in that sense. The ones with the really loud engines. I'm driving a car.
With those bloody like lack of mufflers. I'm like, you spent that much on a car and you couldn't get a muffler?
I know. It's like, put a silencer on that shit.
Yeah.
Like, what is going on?
Because it really like just sets off my adrenaline, those stupid loud cars.
Yeah.
So many things in life that people just shove this like overstimulating crap in your face, and you're just like, well, now my day's ruined.
Yeah. So if your penis were a car, what make, model, what do you think?
Something like nothing like too crazy out there. Good size, but not too flashy.
Okay. A station wagon?
And I was thinking like an SUV, like maybe like a Toyota RAV4 or like one of those mid brands, a Subaru or a Toyota, you know, mid range, nice, does the job, people appreciate it, but
it's not too loud.
Yeah, like it's not gonna have everyone like oohing and ahhing.
It's not too hard to find parts for if you need to repair it.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, it's a
Wow.
bit more like a European car in that. I'm always like saying to the only surgeon in Australia, "Don't you get sick?" Because I'll have a long way to travel to get help otherwise. Literally the other side of the world. But yeah, very, very happy with my results. And hopefully this last stage goes smooth. And
Yeah. And thank goodness you had like a house to sell or something in order to, and all these other things in order to fund the
I'm very
surgery.
lucky in just like the timing of my, just, happened to buy a house at the right time and had the skills to be able to do it up a bit and had family to back me.
Yeah.
You could, something I realized, you have way more opportunities to take risks when you have a safety net to fall back on.
Yep.
Like if I ended up homeless because I screwed up, I had family that wouldn't let me live on the street.
Yeah.
I was also privileged that I had parents that brought me up to have skills instead of, I feel really bad for people where their parents are too much of control freaks to let them actually learn.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, oh, well, I'll just do it because you're doing it bad. And
Yeah.
like,
Or no, let's just pay someone to do it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Dull. Well, now I'm feeling more like it's time for me to start doing things to help the next generation not have as many struggles.
So, with all of that said, I mean, again, it's always like just scratching the surface anytime we talk about anything. Right?
Yeah. It's a story that could take up a whole book.
Yes.
Everyone's life is so many experiences.
Yeah. So what is something that you can give people to think about in terms of thriving as a person who identifies with the groups that you identify with as a trans person in particular?
I guess really explore the deep down parts of yourself that drive you and make you who you are, and the values that actually make life important. Might need someone to help you along those ways if that's a dangerous place to go on your own, which it is often for people who are struggling. But in the end, like, so much of the stories we get from the outside world is that we're here to please others or to comply with someone else's idea of who you should be. Yeah. And that's never made anyone happy. No one on those paths has ever really done... You don't do a lot to give back to the world in that mindset.
Yeah.
You're really just existing, surviving to fulfill someone else's need. And that's not what we're here for.
No.
If
that's no fun.
That's just being a pawn in someone's game.
Yeah.
And I'm not here for that. I'm a queen on that board. I just like zippity zap all over the place. Yeah. Kicking ass. I would like to be. But yeah, that's kind of where I see myself headed at this point, is that I want to start contributing back to the community in ways that will help others, in the way that the other trans people helped me in my journey, being there, creating community, just existing and being visible, making me feel like I wasn't alone.
Yeah.
That did wonders for my transition, and there's so much more that needs being done, like advocacy and pushing for policy changes and putting our foot down about this idea that our existence is a debate.
Yeah.
Or that it's an acceptable way to talk about a whole group of people.
Yeah, or at best can be tolerated.
Yeah.
Come on now.
Yeah. It's part of why, like, there's a big motivator for me in pursuing medicine because so
As a career.
as a career,
Yeah.
because so much of the professional voices that speak for us are not trans voices.
Mm-hmm.
There's a need for there to be professional experience first to be accepted as as legitimate. I mean, I'm sure there's also issues with people not trusting you if you have like some sort of investment into it.
Mm.
But it's also important to accept that not everything in a person's experience is this biomedical basic version of humanity. Like, we aren't these simple meat machines that like walk around following strict rules. Our mind is what makes us unique.
Yes.
It's what changes us from just animals surviving to animals trying to think further and make existence important.
Mm-hmm.
And so until we can really accept each other for those unique beings we are, and that we have such different experiences and they're all valid,
Mm-hmm.
we're never going to really be at peace. It's just going to be this boring battle.
Mm-hmm.
But there's the newer ways of approaching medicine that have been taught and practiced these days do accept that complex nature of humanity, that we're social beings with our like psychology and experiences that also meshes with our biology.
Mm-hmm.
And that to me is very fascinating and very important, and something that I can invest myself in and have interest in for a long time. And I think that puts you in a good position for advocacy as well. There's certainly pathways that I could take as well that is just advocacy on the ground. There's loads to be done. Not that I don't see myself partaking in that stuff either. I still have a big investment in that too. But yeah, I think seeing just living and being a real person in the world gives other trans people hope that we don't all fit that stereotype that is put out there of that we're insane, or perhaps you see someone that doesn't quite, who might fit more of that stereotype. You got to understand those people have been pushed and pushed and pushed and harassed and tortured.
Mm-hmm.
And if someone, it doesn't matter if they're trans or just someone in the world that kind of like is on the fringes of society, there's a good chance they're there for a reason.
Yeah.
And it's not just like personal choices that leaves people in those positions.
Absolutely
Very
not.
rarely does someone think, you know what, I would love to be rejected by society and suffer the consequences.
Yeah.
So
I'd love to be oppressed.
So even the idea that we're not all that stereotype, obviously there's, well, not everyone's a stereotype, but there are some people that look closer to that. I also don't want judgment on those people. They can fuck off. Like, stop judging people. Everyone's experiences lead them to the places they are, and it's your job to be compassionate of that, not to judge.
Yeah. Leave space for people to do their thing.
Mm-hmm.
We're all kind of waddling through life in the best way we can.
And it's hard. Being compassionate for people who are struggling often means that the outcome's not exactly what you might want. They might not be able to accept your help or your understanding in the way you would like. They might hurt your feelings because you're trying to be nice and they don't take it as such.
Yeah.
And
that's not a them problem, that's a you problem.
it's our job in that case to accept that they are too hurt to have that relationship or whatever, and to just like keep your chin up and keep on trying to be a good person instead of getting all butthurt and deciding that you're going to be a dickhead because one person was mean to you.
Yeah. It's like, oh, all trans people are angry because someone snapped at my question about their genitals. It's like,
or like I've seen people like they genuinely come in and they're all like, oh yeah, I want to support trans people and people should listen to them. And someone who, you know, is still in a place of hurt kind of goes, oh, stop speaking for us, cishet white man. And it's like, yeah, like you were trying to help and maybe you misread the conversation, whatever, or maybe they just were out of line at that point. But you need to like understand that the world that we live in where it is a very different, and not just trans people, it happens in lots of situations where it's very difficult to navigate how to be a good ally. But being a good ally starts with understanding that it's not always going to be easy, it's not always going to be smooth.
Yeah.
That people might react to you in a way that you don't like.
Yeah.
And it could be that they are just oversensitive at the time, or you stepped into a situation that you weren't quite supposed to, whatever.
Yeah.
Not getting butthurt over small conflicts is number one in allyship, in my opinion.
Yeah, and that's a key component in not centering yourself into someone else's story.
Yeah.
Not centering yourself in someone else's experience of oppression or trauma.
Yeah. And being able to separate your emotions from that situation is important. If you're trying to be a good person to make yourself feel good, you're probably not going to be the best ally.
Yeah, exactly. If you're only going to support someone as far as it makes you comfortable and doesn't infringe on your own level of comfort, you might need to reevaluate what allyship actually means to you.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It took me some challenging myself just to start being a decent ally to other people in this world that need it, that are not from my section of society.
Yeah.
So
it's not enough to go like, oh, well, if you don't appreciate my help, then forget it. I'm just leaving this whole situation.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Meka. I mean, I still have so many questions, and I'm sure lots of people do too, but I'm sure a lot of those things will come out in our further discussions about the various personal development content that we're going to discuss in future episodes of the podcast. So we can wind up this discussion with some final thoughts. Now, we normally finish each episode with a quote to kind of to tie everything together. But you've got something a little bit different for us today.
Yeah.
What's that?
It's just a little, like, thought, a moment in my life, a record I wrote down of how I was feeling just before I started the phalloplasty surgery journey, which takes a while. It's a little longer than some of our short quotes, but let me just, it wraps things up, I think.
Okay.
So I titled it A Turning Point in Life. I'm feeling happy for many reasons. I have motivation and a plan for my life. I am approaching the most important part of my transition, personally for me, which has been a barrier for me continuing my growth. I have plans to go back to uni to start a career that will utilize my major skills and help me live a life that is meaningful to me and that will let me live as a life I'm excited to lead. Despite living with chronic illness, I feel like I am holistically healthier than I have ever been, and I feel like I'm gaining the skills I need to pace myself through the hard times and to let myself thrive in ways I have always dreamed I could. Even on the hard days, I know I'll be all right, or at least that there are people there to help if things feel too much. I've gone from living as a husk of a human, waiting for death, to being excited and inspired by the future despite the hard times ahead. I know it might look to others that I'm throwing away everything I've gained, but money is nothing compared to the progress I have made and will continue to make by committing to living authentically. It's something money can't buy, and I wish I had recognized earlier that living a lie costs more than money. It cost my health, it stifled my potential, it let me devalue my own existence, it let me accept abuse, and it took away parts of myself that I'll never get back. I don't even know how to explain the vast difference there is between how I feel about the future now versus how it felt before. It always felt like I was living a character, that I was a puppeteer conducting someone else's life. It almost seems foreign to me now, being seen as the person I am. As the image of me slowly becomes clearer in the mirror, I step out into the world each day, stronger than the last. Finally, I am in focus, and in turn, the world is in focus for me. It's like being naked, finally stripping off the costume and feeling the cool air after being stifled by the heavy weight of the character people thought I was. I might be imperfect, but this is me, and I love him.
Aww. You're the best, Meka.
No, you're the best.
No, you're
Leslie.
the best. I'm trying to not center myself in the conversation, so you're the best.
Yeah, I'm the best.
Speaking of not centering myself, where can people find us, Meka?
On your Instagram.
Whoops.
Because
I fail.
Because I don't like to deal with social media. And also your website.
Yes. So, yeah, leslievcoaching.com. That's my website. My Instagram is at leslievcoaching, Leslie. Because I can't spell Leslie without why.
Why, Leslie? Why?
I don't know. Yeah. Keep up with what we're doing. Send us some love. Send us some thoughts about this episode or other episodes. Any books you'd like us to dive into. If you are perhaps a white supremacist who wants to white-splain some things to me, go ahead and do that. I will forward your message on to people who can take care of you.
Yeah, or if you're tough, just let me know what you think of me, and I'll I'll message you onto hell.
Yeah, we have special filters in place for that kind of stuff.
Special filing cabinet for that.
Because I know that there are a lot of white supremacist TERFs who will listen to our podcast to the very end of the episode. Just so they can go, I need to know how to contact these people because I'm mad. Oppressors are adorable. Anyway.
They have so much going on in their lives.
Yeah. They're too busy trying to remember all these pronouns. We need to stop making it harder for them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Stop imposing on their lives.
Stop shoving things down their throat. It's like,
I mean, it's big, but it's not that big.
I'm going to tell your surgeon you said that. That was a bit of a shower, a grower, not a shower, that joke.
I like it.
Anyway.
I'm going to not get off topic again.
Okay. Yeah, let's not get you off, Meka. Let's instead just say bye-bye, and we will see you in our next episode.
Bye.
Bye.